Hey there, everyone. Great to be back with you. A new battle for Europe has begun. That's what we'll be talking about on today's video. John O'Sullivan over at The Spectator has a very interesting piece entitled East versus West, the New Battle for Europe, where he very helpfully explains what he sees as the heart of the tension between Brussels and Central and Eastern Europe, which are becoming symbolic of a battle between what he calls false Europe versus true Europe. I have my issues with his analysis here and there, but all in all, it's a good piece. And again, it's very telling in terms of where we are on the world stage, as it were. What O'Sullivan basically argues is that the political status quo that existed for some years after the Cold War is basically falling apart. It's imploding. And one of the victims of this implosion is the political center left. He notes that the post-1989 political left is really just collapsing almost everywhere. Now, of course, we've talked about this on a number of occasions in our videos, but it really is the case that the center left, which was the dominant political coalition post-1989, is basically on the verge of extinction. And he points to the Visegrad Four as ground zero for this implosion. He notes that the Czech Social Democrats, the center-left there, they only got 7% of the vote in their last elections. And of course, we've noted that, well, since this piece was published, the Czech Republic has just re-elected their nationalist populist president this past weekend, in fact. O'Sullivan observes, this is neat, he observes that Poland's political left has all but disappeared in the last few Polish elections, and the levers of political power are now being contested basically between two right-wing parties, the Civic Platform Party on the one hand and the Law and Justice Party on the other, which is, for him, in British terms, is basically like a battle between the urban Whig Party and a rural Tory one. Now, he notes that 3 years ago, 5 parties on the Hungarian left formed a single coalition to maximize their vote share. And get this, that maximized vote share barely made up 25% nationally, compared with the 20% for just the single populist right Jobbik party and 45% for the ruling Fidesz party led by Viktor Orban, who, by the way, should win re-election very easily this year, perhaps in a landslide. Right now, Hungary basically has a 65% right-wing political majority in their nation. And in Slovakia, the electoral contest is between a center-right coalition and a Babis-type ex-communist entrepreneur turned populist, Robert Fico, whose party now dominates the scene. Now, in light of all this, O'Sullivan observes that a very consistent, very powerful political ideology is emerging among these nationalist and populist parties. First, the irony in all of this is that while Brussels and the EU are accusing these Central and Eastern European nations of anti-democratic and authoritarian tendencies, they're coming out and saying it's precisely just such anti-democratic and authoritarian tendencies coming from the bullies in Brussels that these nations are standing against. From nationalist populist leaders, we can go over to Britain with Nigel Farage and then back to Central Europe with Orban and Andrzej Duda. We hear speech after speech after speech. They want a restoration of democracy and an end to Brussels' dictatorship over their affairs, over their own sovereign nation. And so they see all of this posturing by bureaucrats as a bunch of hypocritical nonsense. They hear politicians and bureaucrats continue to laud liberalism and human freedom, all the while insisting populations submit to their own rationally planned and standardized bureaucratic protocols. Brussels claims to celebrate human rights and democracy, all the while they look the other way when Madrid cracks down on Catalan voters and their democratically won independence, as well as threatening to strip away the voting rights of Poland and Hungary. That's really democratic of you, Brussels, right? And then Brussels claims to represent European values while stripping the continent of its historic Christian identity and traditions. So what we're hearing more and more from the new nationalist right is indeed a celebration of democracy, or better, a restoration of democracy, where Poland can be governed by Poles and Hungary governed by Hungarians and Britain by Brits and the like. Secondly, O'Sullivan notes that these Central and Eastern European nations have overcome their, shall we say, ideological and economic reliance on the West, which was so prevalent post-1989, and now they're beginning to pursue their own ideological and economic and indeed cultural interests. So when Trump came out to visit Poland, you had Poles celebrating the nationalist populist slogan, "Make Poland great again," right? The same could be said for all of Central and Eastern European nations. Having regained their long-awaited independence from the Soviets, they self-consciously value both their national sovereignty and their own distinctive cultural identity, and they are absolutely willing, ready, and able to defend it. This is the surge of the new nationalism that's sweeping. It's sweeping not just Europe, but indeed the whole world at the moment. The Cold War is over, and nations are returning to their own customs, traditions, and religions as the basis of their own distinctive social orders. This is why we can say over and over again on this channel, a new conservative age is indeed rising. We are living in the midst of a mass paradigm shift away from secular globalism and becoming more and more centered on nation, culture, and tradition. I want to read some portions of this article for you because I think it's just so good here. Quote, from the standpoint of what Donald Rumsfeld once called the new Europe, especially the new conservative parties among them, it is EU orthodoxy that represents a false Europe in embodying both an oligarchic political structure and a sterile, repressive culture that defines anything it dislikes as hostile to liberal democracy. Isn't that beautiful? Did you catch that? The EU represents a false Europe through its dictatorial, elitist political structure and its sterile, repressive, modern, technocratic culture that labels any detractors as hateful and bigoted and anti-democratic. I mean, it's just beautiful. I love this kind of writing. Quote, these Central Europeans see themselves as the true Europe, one which values the nation-state, the family, prudential politics, the Christian religion, and majoritarian democracy, and sees them as more authentic echoes of European tradition. Amen to that. So their tussles with Brussels, nice phrase, their tussles with Brussels are not about being anti-European, but a battle over what it means to be European. That's some good stuff there. He goes on, Emmanuel Macron has been keen to cast his own vision of Europe as the only vision. He tells Central Europeans that the countries in Europe that don't respect the rules should have to face the political consequences. But that's not how politics, certainly democratic politics, works. It's unrealistic to imagine that France, Germany, and Brussels can, between them, invite millions of migrants into Europe and then simply instruct their countries to accept them. The countries he refers to want to change rules like that and the utopian mentality behind them. That's some good writing. Now, O'Sullivan points out that this is all beginning to heat up, right? With French and German support, Brussels has been threatening Poland and Hungary with penalties and censures for their supposed assault against democratic values and protocols. Now, of course, the pathetic irony in all of this is that these nations are actually far more democratic than the European Union itself. I mean, this is basically Orwellian at this point. But it's not going to work. It's just not going to work. O'Sullivan recognizes that the strategy of Merkel and Macron and Brussels to try to marginalize nationalist populist movements by just dismissing them as anti-democratic and authoritarian and trying to impose sanctions, it's in fact backfiring. Brussels is coming out looking ridiculously arrogant and dismissive, while nationalist and populist parties are capturing the hearts and minds of Europeans throughout the continent. This is why we're seeing the rise of the nationalist right throughout Western Europe as well. France, Italy, the Netherlands, Sweden, Finland, Spain, Greece, Austria, even Germany, ADF Germany. They're all seeing a mass rise in nationalist populist political activism. And in many respects, that's just the tip of the iceberg. And of course, we'd be remiss to forget that glorious event in June of 2016, the one, the only Brexit, which just sent shockwaves and continues to send shockwaves throughout the Eurozone. So here's how he ends the article. In the old left versus right world, both sides essentially accepted that the other would win power occasionally. But now we have a centrist establishment in Europe that does not really accept the right of its challengers to come to power. And when they do, it casts them as being illegitimate or extremists and seeks to use supranational legal and political powers to constrain or oust them. But this has not so far worked, given how few voters in the offending nations wish to back down. Brexit Britain may end up watching from the sidelines, but a new battle for Europe has begun. I'll make sure to link the article for you if you'd like to consult it yourself. It's very, very well done. As always, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It'll be a privilege to have you as part of this channel. God bless.